Hello and welcome to Blackmans Bay Studios. My name is Mick and this is my old mate Keith. And Keith,
how are you?
Alright, thank you. And Keith, we've decided to talk about something that we visited very briefly in one of our previous videos, aren't we?
Yep. We're going to be talking about the Mason years, and we've named this video Rockin' All Over the South.
Oh yeah.
It's about our encounters with some of or most of the world's leading rock bands and artists back in the day. Serious name dropping, of course.
Yes, there will be.
And we just thought we'd do that because of had a bit of an encounter on Facebook with one of my old work buddies, and we'll get a bit more into that later. But we thought, well, you know, it might be worth having a little look at, might it, Mick?
Yeah.
You know,
yeah.
And see what was going on. So, you know.
What years are we talking about, Keith?
Yeah, well,
roughly.
We're talking about from 68 to 72, 73-ish. You know, I mean, it's 50 years ago now, mate. 50 odd years ago, isn't it?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
You know, we'll be talking about we've got some comments from other people that were working there that we didn't have the last time.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And, you know, the venues. What about the venues we worked at, Mick?
Yes, the venues were the Greyhound at Croydon, which was the main one. Then you had the Big Apple, which was in Brighton, in the south of England. The Winning Post in London, Surrey Tavern, and the Orchid at Purley.
Yeah, there were a few more, but I mean they were the mainstay ones, you know.
Yeah. Now we're not talking about pop bands here. So what would the clientele, Keith? How would you describe?
Well,
them?
they were the university student, college student,
yeah.
hippies. We did have the occasional Hell's Angels in, but more about that later.
Yeah,
but
yeah,
you know, yeah. So you know, it was fantastic times for us.
It was,
you know?
yeah, it was.
And let's talk about the crew, Mick. So,
right. Okay,
you know,
so first of all, the promoter, he was Brian Mason, lived in Mallorca actually. How the other half lived, but he was a really nice bloke, a very, very astute businessman, wasn't he? Then he had a right-hand man,
Stevie Preble, who went on to own Pinnacle Records in the UK.
Terrific
in
bloke.
Orpington, yeah.
He was a really, really professional. We didn't have his head up his own arse.
No.
Really nice bloke. I liked
was
Steve.
okay,
He was
yeah.
very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course there was myself and Mick. There was Dave Fawn. There was Martin Hodson.
Bless him. He's
Martin no longer with us.
Yeah.
Paul Morby, Jeff Morby.
Yeah.
But we also raked others in like Kenny Osborne and Ray Bamwell, of course, and even old Alfie Pilcher, for the people in the Cray who knew old Alfie, you know, 20 stone of him, you know.
Yeah.
So you know that. You know, Dave Fawn was actually amongst all of our sort of crowd was the one who went there first. I think my brother got involved. He took him along because Dave had the only working car in the Cray or something. So they used to go along to the Greyhound.
Yeah.
And you know, the bouncers that and they called them bouncers back in them days. The bouncers that Brian Mason had were all big rugby type geezers. You know, there was Terry Hodson, there was Bobby Johnson. My brother was 6'4". Alfie Pilcher, like I say, was 20 stone. Yeah. And when he moved over into the, you know, hey man set, you know, they thought that big bruising bouncers like you have in discos weren't the thing to have.
Yeah.
So
that's where we came in.
That's where we came in because we
had
the long hair. And he wanted that more relaxed.
Yeah. And he was right.
Yeah,
he was right.
You know, look, we worked there close to 5 years, and didn't see one. There wasn't one fight in all of that time. No. Not one. There was the odd little disturbance, but not what you would call that. So and we met and, you know, worked with some of the biggest bands on the planet. You know.
And what I'll do
It's going
now,
to do a little list.
I'll give you a list. It's not a comprehensive list, but it'll give you an idea of the bands. Right, so we had Van Morrison, Tethro Tull, Thin Lizzy, Status Quo, The Groundhogs, Uriah Heep, Donovan, Fleetwood Mac, Jack Bruce from the Cream, Edgar Broughton Band, Nazareth, David Bowie, Mott the Hoople, Argent, Faces, Wishbone Ash, Lou Reed, Hawkwind, King Crimson, Rory Gallagher, Barclay James Harvest, Genesis, Lindisfarne, Deep Purple, just to name a few.
Yes, that's right, you know. And did you mention the Stones there, Mick?
No,
we'll leave that till later.
We'll come to them later.
Yeah. So, I've done a bit of a poll around the people that are still with us. And we thought we would talk about who was the best bands you saw, who was the worst bands you saw. And interestingly enough, the way this started, because Dave Ergerberg put a story up about Lou Reed, right? And as I said to David, I met Lou Reed, I worked with Lou Reed. Lou Reed was a fucking weirdo, and he was, right? And without saying anything, when Mick came the following Saturday, I never said anything to him. We were talking about the days of the ground, and I never even mentioned Lou Reed. And the first thing that came out of Mick's mouth was, the worst performer I've ever seen was Lou Reed. Is that it's gospel truth?
It's true.
And I feel the same way. He was absolute shit.
Now, we've got to qualify this. Any person that gets up in front of a big crowd of people and does a performance, that takes guts. It takes a lot of guts. And we've got the utmost respect for performers. But it has to be said, some are better than the others. But Lou Reed is in a league of his own. I remember standing in the bar while he was on stage performing, and I thought, people have paid money to listen to this shit. You know, I couldn't believe it. You know, it was that bad.
It was bad.
He was a weirdo. Yeah.
So come on, Mick. What's your most favourite band?
Well,
best performance?
To me, the best, most professional performers were Status Quo, and the reason I say that is we used to get there early, of course, but by the time we got there, they had set up, sound checked, done a quick run through, and were sitting in the bar when we got there. And no other band ever did any of that. They can be good, they can be very, very good, but I think Status Quo,
very professional.
Yeah, and they were a fantastic bunch of blokes, weren't they?
So Mick's favourite was Quo.
Yeah,
I like Quo as well, but also like as a show, as a spectacle, one of the best bands I used to like watching was Lindisfarne.
Oh yeah,
they were
good,
absolutely
very
fantastic
good. Yeah, they were.
live, you know. Yeah. And of course, my worst performer was Lou Reed, same as Mick's. But Mick, you've also added another little category down there, didn't you?
Yes,
and I have to 100% agree with you.
Yeah, there's a very good reason for this. It's called The Biggest Wanker, right? And by a country mile, it's Rod Stewart.
Yeah.
Now, let me explain that. When Steve Marriott left the Small Faces, they recruited another singer named Rod Stewart, and they was in the doldrums. They weren't getting the gigs, so anyway, so they was going along. Brian signed them up to his standard contract, where he paid them a fairly small fee, but in that contract was a clause that said that sometime in the future Brian could call them back to do another gig for the same price. Well, in about 1971, Rod Stewart had a massive hit all over the world with Maggie May, and the Faces as a band had a massive LP called A Nod Is As Good As a Wink for a Blind Horse, and from that album came Stay With Me, and that was a big hit. So Brian called them back, and the band were very, very unhappy about the deal, because they were back in the big time but getting small time money. Now, one of the golden rules of show business is you do not turn up late for a paid performance. Rod Stewart turned up an hour and a half late on a Sunday, where Britain had very strict closing rules on a Sunday, licensing laws, and he went in the dressing room, and he said, "I'm not going out." He said, "because they'll lynch me if I go out there." And Steve Preble, to his credit, got him by the throat up against the wall and said, "You fucking get out there now." Right?
We were standing right next to it.
They went out. They they did a fairly good show. It was all right, you know. The crowd, you know, forgave them and they was happy. It did overrun as well, which was unheard of on a Sunday. And then after the show, Rod Stewart never showed again. And the three of the band came out to confront Brian about the money.
Because they overran and he had very strict licensing laws, Brian Mason very shrewdly refused to fucking pay them.
Yeah. So you've got Ronnie Wood standing there with I think Kenny Jones or someone other. And Ron was the worst for wear for drink, I have to say, and he also had a big jug in his hand, half pint of lager in it. And I can't remember the words, but he made a sort of veiled threat to Brian, and Keith, myself and Martin Hodson were standing behind him, and Brian made the comment, well, I wouldn't do that if I was you, Ron, and look behind him at us three.
With my boys.
I'm thinking, fuck me, I'm going to be fighting Ronnie Wood. Anyway, it all calmed down and they went, but Rod Stewart never see hide a hair of me again. No. So that's why I called him the biggest wanker we had there.
Yeah. So Dave Thorne's best performer, he didn't have a worst performer, Dave, but he reckoned his best performance was Black Sabbath, and he liked the Edgar Broughton Band. Paul Morby, now Paul's on Facebook, I hope he writes some comments because we're going to post this or something. Yeah. You know, I haven't physically seen Paul for over 40 years, so it's, you know, talking to him back on Facebook has been quite a pleasure. Yeah. So Paul's best performance was the Stones. He loved the Stones when we were down there at Big Apple. His worst performance, he reckoned, was a group called Quintessence. And I've got to say, I never heard of them.
I don't remember them.
You know. Now his brother Paul's best performer was
Jeff.
Jeff Mulvey. His favourite performer was Mock the Hoople, and they were good live.
They were very
good live. And his worst performer, Mick, was
O.C. Bisa.
O.C. Bisa. I've heard of them, but I couldn't.
Yeah, he said that was all drums and whistles, so I can agree with that. I can understand that definitely.
Yeah. Well, I think it comes down to. You know, the toss-up for worst performers for me, which was obviously Lou Reed, but I'll tell you someone who came a close second, that was Ginger Baker. You know, Now Ginger Baker live, and they just had these inane drum solos because they wanted a spotlight on Ginger Baker. A drum solos, you don't want it all through the night.
Every single song had this big long drum solo, you know. I was standing there thinking to myself, I fucking get it, you're a good drummer, get on with it, you know. And it just drum solos went on and every single song, on and on and on, you know. Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, and while we're talking about Ginger Baker, Dave Thorne related a story of where they used to queue up down the side of the, I've got a photo here, of the side where they used to queue up to get into the Greyhound. There's all those windows along the top there, and Dave Thorne said that Ginger Baker stood there one night pissing over the queue. You know, now whether or not
I don't remember that.
I don't remember it, but but he said he was out there pissing. He probably had too much freaking ganja down him or something like that. You know, yeah. Oh, yeah. So there's some of the things. Now, Mick. Obviously, the highlight of our working with Mason was the Stones gig down at the Big Apple, and I think it was for most of the crew that went there. For us, it was a 2-day event. We had to get there the day before, get all set up, and that's when Charlie Watts turned up. Yeah, because Charlie used to look after all of the make sure the stage was set right and.
And to their credit, the Rolling Stones, out of their own pocket, paid to have the stage extended.
Yeah, so Mick Jagger could dance about with it.
Yeah. Now, it was £1,000 to do that, and £1,000 at that time, that was a hell of a lot of money to shell out for it. But that's what they did to their credit. Yeah, and. Funny thing happened on the Charlie Watts showed up in the afternoon, and Martin said hello, and he said, I've just come to jumped to check the stage, and Martin said to him, "Why? Who are you?" and laughed. And Charlie Watts thought he never had his head up his arse at all,
No,
did
he
he?
was
He was a really nice bloke. And
I think he actually said to Martin, Martin Hodgson, "Oh, what's your name?" And Martin said, "Martin, what's yours?"
yes, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's classic Martin Hodgson sense of humour. And Charlie, to his credit, loved it. He thought it was hilarious.
And of course, and that was the gig that we tried to throw Mick Taylor out of his own gig.
Mick Taylor.
He was up himself.
Oh yeah, he was. See, the story is, Brian Jones died in a tragic accident at his house, and they recruited Mick Taylor in to take over the guitar. And from what I can find out, Mick Taylor was a very, very good guitarist, as said by Keith Richard in a recent documentary. Very technical, but he didn't quite fit in. And if I remember rightly, at the gig, your role was to bring the talent up in the lift, and my role was to walk them across the main area to the dressing rooms. Mick Taylor came up with his entourage, and there was two middle-aged people there who I assume were his mum and dad. When the lift door opened, he marched out and said, "I want to speak to the promoter." So I said, "All right then." So I went over to Brian. Brian was talking to this gentleman in a uniform, and he looked superb. He really did look the part. And I whispered in Brian's ear that Mick Taylor would like a word with him, and he said, "Yeah." He said, "I'll only be a couple of minutes." So I went and told Mick Taylor. He came out. He went, "Oi, I'm Mick Taylor of the Rolling Stones. I want a word with you." And Brian turned round and said, "See this man here? He's the chief fire officer of the south of England, and he's more important than you'll ever be." Right? So you had two things there. Mick Taylor made a prat of himself, and Brian made him look a prat in front of his mum and dad, and I'm sure they was mum. He stomped off, didn't he?
Yeah.
And they did the show, but they didn't do something that all bands do, don't they?
Yeah.
And that was an encore.
Didn't do an encore, which
Very
is
unusual, yeah. And we reckon it was down to that wanker.
Yeah, could be. Yeah.
It's not as bad as Rod Stewart.
Well, I stopped him getting in the lift. Because I didn't know who he was. I mean, you recognise the Stone, you recognise. I didn't know who he was. I mean, we didn't have Tinternet back in them days, did we? So you wouldn't know who he was. I didn't know who he was. Anyway, so yeah. So and one of the other things that came out of that, the story out of that was old Paul Morby. I was talking to Paul Morby, and he said they had two towers built, put big spotlights on the top of them, and Stevie Pebble said to Paul, he said, "I want you to climb up on that tower to stop people climbing up on the tower." And there's Paul. I mean, Paul was a little bloke. I mean, he weren't the most agile, was he?
The cat, our goalkeeper.
But he wasn't the most agile of people, and there he is climbing up this tower. It was funny, though, wasn't it?
We all ended up on the stage. Well, me, Keith and Martin did, didn't we? While they were performing. And fun enough, in the documentaries about being in the Rolling Stones that were recently on TV, they showed Mick Jagger throwing rose petals at the audience, and it took me right back because he did exactly that.
Down at the Apple.
And I was standing next to Keith Richard at a safe distance. Keith Richard was there, and then there was an old stand-up piano that belonged to the venue, and he had a bottle on it, and it was a bottle of brandy, not a big bottle, about like that. And when they finished the number, he turned round, he undid the bottle, and I mean, we liked to drink, didn't we, Keith?
Yeah.
We liked to drink, but we weren't. He was in a different league, wasn't he?
League, yeah.
He drank it right down.
Well, they all
and he
were.
carried on as if nothing was, as professional as it ever.
I saw Ian Hunter down almost 3/4 of a whole bottle of vodka before he went out on stage. I think that was at the Orchid. I think he did that, but unbelievable, And it's while we're talking about memories.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, what about the night I saved Stacia of Hawkwind's life?
Oh yeah. She was.
Yeah.
She was a girl you didn't forget in an hurry, did you?
Got a photo here, right? So Stacia, she used to get up and dance the Hawkwind, a bollock naked, you know. And one night was at the winning post, and she walked across the floor because she also used to pick up speakers and carry them off the stage and all that, didn't she?
A very well endowed girl, wasn't she?
And she got off the stage and stepped on a glass, and her foot was pouring of blood, and I spotted it. So I grabbed hold of her, and I sat her on a chair, and me being the first aider. And anyway, I stopped the bleeding. It was quite a bad cut. There was a bit of glass sticking out of her foot, which I actually pulled out because she wouldn't have been able to walk on it. Anyway, I did a makeshift bandage. It saved the girl's life.
Yep.
And she's on Facebook. I sent her a message and told her about the show. She ain't come back to me.
Yeah, there's the thanks you get.
There's your thanks you get. 50 odd years ago, you saved a woman's life.
Yeah.
Don't even bother to come back to you.
Yeah.
You know?
Very disappointing.
Yeah.
Very disappointing.
Yeah, we mentioned the bikers early on and the Hells Angels, didn't we, Mick?
Yeah.
That's
How
interesting.
could I forget that?
Yeah.
Because they came in one week, and the bloke who obviously must have been their leader, he must have been working on his bike because he looked like he went like that, and there was a scuff mark there. Anyway, they came in, had a few pints, watched the band, and went. No trouble at all. They came in the next week, and that bloke's that scuff there, it was a bit weird, and they all stood down the back. And I remember I was standing at the top of the stairs, which was the other side of the bar, and Keith came over to me. He said, "You ain't going to believe this." I said, "What?" He said, "Steve told us we've got to chuck them bikies out." So what? So the bloke that used to run the bar, the governor of the pub, bar building,
wanker.
whatever he was a wanker. Anyway, so he said, "Coming in." All right. So we walked across the foyer at the top of the stairs, through the bar, and I'm thinking, oh, we're going to get fucking murdered here. They took about a long walk, and we went into the hall, and they was all lined up down the back, and the bloke, their leader, was standing in the middle with his scuff here. Keith went up to him, to his credit, and said, "I'm sorry, mate, but you and your friends have got to leave." And he, to my utter shock, I could have fallen over. He went, "Oh, all right then." His girlfriend turned round and went, "Well, that's fucking out of order." And he said, "Oh, you, shut up." And the blokes never said, all they did, they just walked straight out. I couldn't believe it, and I still can't believe it to this day.
They got their money back. I mean, you know, Kenny was they
It's just unbelievable.
Yeah.
But I don't mind admitting I was genuinely shitting myself, because we would have got murdered.
Yeah, so, you know, I mean, I was, you know, talking again to Paul, some of the things that, you know, one of Paul's lasting memories was having drinks with Stan Webb at Chicken Shack, and I used to drink regularly with Stan Webb over at the winning post of Chicken Shack, and Stan used to live next door to Tommy Cooper, and he said, "I've got to stop." He said, "I'll just keep talking like Tommy Cooper," and he did. He used to go like that all the time. And he said he's rubbing off on me. You know, it was an amazing bloke, old Stan. But yeah, but you know, those days of, you know, we used to have a beer with Quo and Ronnie Wood and all of them, and meeting some of those people was just amazing.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. It was.
Yeah, and of course, one of the other things that used to get me was the cool talk, Mick. You know, the hippie cool talk, which, and we've said it before. I've said it's an act. It's an act. We've seen band members, you know, talking.
Oh yeah.
You know, hey mate, you know, and when you're standing there with, you've got, say, you know, 4 or 5 university students, and they're talking to one another, and they're all going, "Hey man, you know, did you see that band? Oh, I mean, a heavy babe." You know, they're giving large, and I go to the bar, get a pint, and one of them comes up behind me and goes, "Oi, John, give us a fucking pint of lager, will you?" You know, and we've seen it, and it's this, you know, this acting. I mean, all these people who want to, you know, sort of latch on to an ideology, you know, like today the hip hop stuff. You know, this hip hop stuff is all bullshit.
Yeah.
It's an act.
I mean, even this day and age, Paul McCartney and Ringo Starr, whenever you see them, they're always doing this. It's all bullshit.
It's an act, you know. the punk era was an act. It's an act. And the same with the Hippies, and the Hippies probably were the biggest act, I reckon, you know.
Yeah, not half.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
But there you are.
Yeah, that's how it was.
Yeah, so look, thanks for watching. Thanks for indulging us again.
Hope you've enjoyed it.
Yeah.
And, it's good to talk about it again, isn't it, Keith?
Yeah.
Because they were good times. And thanks to Paul, Jeff, and Dave, and for their contributions. You know, we do appreciate it.
Yeah.
And it's.
Well, I hope they put some comments underneath, you know, because I mean they were all part of the same era, weren't they? You know, and all got stories to tell. So it was some good times.
Yeah. Okay.
Us with the famous people.
Yeah.
Right? Little old us here in Blackmans Bay in Kingston, Tasmania. Right?
Yeah.
There you are.
Yeah. So I think that's about it, Keith. Then yeah.
Okay. Yep. All
So
right.
without more ado, we'll say bye-bye. Thanks for watching.
And watch out next time. I think we've got another one in the pipeline.
Yes.
Should be interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This has been a Blackmans Bay Studio production.